So we're back. This is titled Single Jacking Fool for $1 a Day by Tom Trumbull. The following story, written by Thomas J. Trumbull, first appeared in the Colorado State Historical Society magazine, Colorado Heritage, in autumn of 1994. Before that printing, the author unfortunately passed away and never saw the article. It is with the kind permission of his nephew, Tom Lindquist, and his wife, Blanche, trustees of Trumbull's estate, that this article can be reprinted. It so captured the atmosphere of what went on in the hills around Silverton over the years that this inclusion proved irresistible. So far, the mines we have talked about and explored were the large mines, the company mines. For every one of those mines, there were a dozen or more that existed like this one described in the following story. Are you ready? In the depths of the 1930s Depression, it got to be where the offer of a job, any job, looked good, and one must keep that in mind when reading what I did in the autumn of 1931. I was offered a job as an apprentice miner to work at a mine northeast of Silverton, Colorado. Wages $1 a day. Room and board paid. I was told that the work would be hand mining, which means working without the machine help of any kind, but nothing was said of the location of the mine with respect to the town of Silverton, and unfortunately it didn't occur to me that I should ask about that. Two others, students at the same mining school with me, the Colorado School of Mines, also temporarily out of school for lack of funds, accepted this offer, and on November 16th we met at the appointed place in Denver, each with his bedroll and suitcase. Our new boss met us with a shiny, prosperous-looking stake body truck. We loaded the truck with picks, shovels, roofing paper, dynamite, canned goods by the case, and such. We threw our gear on board, climbed on, and headed for Silverton in the high country of southwest Colorado. And in spite of an early start from Denver, it was late afternoon and snowing by the time we reached Montrose. All agreed it would be better to continue than to pay money for a room for the night. We were four, three riding in the truck cab with the fourth on top of the load in the rear. As the evening wore on, this outside spot got rougher and we could leave a man up there only a short time. It was midnight when we reached Ouray, which sits in a deep hole with high mountains all around it. Here we had a hot meal preparatory to tackling Red Mountain Pass. About 12:30 we started up the road, which climbs abruptly out of Ouray on a series of switchbacks one after the other. It was now snowing hard, the wind was blowing, the temperature hovered well below zero. All told, it was a hell of a night. The boss had been raised in this, and it didn't occur to us to ask him if we were being wise. We simply did what he thought best. In numbers of miles, this is only a short trip, but it made up in quality what it might lack in quantity. The switchbacks didn't look bad in that swirling nothingness of snow, and we couldn't see what lay below the road on the side without a cliff. And it is just as well, for had we been able to see what we were nearly skidding into every little minute, I'm sure we would have all died then and there of fright. We finally arrived in Silverton a few hours before daylight. The boss took us to the hotel and registered, saying we would have to stay there a night, while we gathered up more supplies and made arrangements for a string of pack mules to haul supplies into the mine. We might have had some warning that first morning in Silverton, but it all went right over our heads. When the waitress in the cafe asked us if we were going to be around a while, we replied that we were headed for the Highland Mary mine to work. She looked at the cook, who just shrugged. Then she said, "You boys miners?" as she brought us bacon and eggs. I said, "Well, no, but we are going to learn the job." The boss came in then and introduced us to both the cook and the waitress, and asked the cook where the livery stable owner might be. The cook said he probably had gone to the post office, and if so, would stop for coffee on the way back. It seems that the livery stable owner's business was the operation of several strings of pack mules, hauling supplies to and from the less accessible mines in the area. In a few minutes the man arrived. He too greeted the boss as an old friend and asked him, "What the hell are you doing up here this time of year?" "We're going to work on the Trilby Tunnel at the Highland Mary," was the answer. "And how are the chances at making arrangements for some of your mules to get our stuff up there?" The liveryman looked blank for a minute, then said, "What do you mean, supplies up there? You know as well as I do that getting mules over that trail has been out of the question for over a month, and will be out of the question until probably next June." The boss looked unhappy and admitted that he had known that would probably be the answer, but was hoping the snow hadn't closed things up yet. The liveryman looked as though he was about to say more, but didn't. The boss stirred his coffee silently while we sat there stunned. Our new jobs were going up in smoke in much less time than it takes in the telling. Then the boss said, "There is a way, of course," and we waited for him to go on. "We can pack the stuff up on our backs. It's only a mile from the mill up to the Trilby bunkhouse, and it won't be too bad." It didn't occur to any of us to ask why mules couldn't go in November, where they could go in June, or what reason he might have for thinking we could do what mules couldn't. In short, any job was still a job, and we didn't hesitate. Fools do rush in. Next morning we headed out of town with the truck loaded completely to the gunnels with supplies, more food, fuse, blasting caps, drill steel, blacksmith coal on top of the load hauled from Denver, and on top of it all our bedrolls and bags. It was a beautiful morning, clear and very cold, 10 below zero. The road was well plowed for the first few miles, and fairly well cleared when we left the main road for a side road heading south into what the boss named as Cunningham Gulch, a gorge carved out by glacial action perhaps 1,000 feet deep, U-shaped with nearly vertical sidewalls. It's a quarter of a mile across from wall to wall and several miles long, ending at the Highland Mary mine and rising steeply from there to a tremendous alpine cirque a couple thousand feet above the bottom of the gulch and well above timberline. At the beginning of this slope upward there is an abandoned mill, and above the mill a caretaker's house. From there to the Trilby Tunnel was only a mile. But what a mile! This last distance to the mill was a matter of bucking snow so deep that time and again we were stopped cold only to back up and take a run to plow further on. There, at the end of the road, close to the mill, the boss showed us the Trilby Tunnel. He pointed straight up. There, hanging precariously to what appeared to be a sheer cliff, 1,000 feet above us was a building which looked to be hanging by its fingernails, terribly temporarily. I asked the boss, "How long has that been there?" Lightly enough, he answered, "Nearly 40 years, or half the building at least." "Half of it? What happened to the other half?" "I'll tell you all about it when we get up there, where we can see it better." By this time you must be certain we were all insane, but remember, hunger and the need of a job do strange things to people. Then came the caretaker to see what was going on. He greeted the boss sourly, seeming to feel that he had been invaded. The boss greeted him cheerfully enough and introduced us to the man whose name was Palmer. Palmer had lived too long by himself, a watchman of closed mines, accustomed to seeing no one for months on end. Sidebar, insurance companies often required that there be a person at the closed-up mine buildings in order to insure them. So that was what, there's another story in here kind of about that. The boss went on to say we would have to bunk with Palmer at his place for a few days while we were getting our stuff hauled up the hill and getting the bunkhouse ready for our use. Palmer looked dubious, and the boss said, Haven't you had word from Craig?" Palmer said, "Yes, I have, but I told him this whole thing is impossible this time of year and that he could forget about the whole crazy idea until spring, and he hasn't answered yet." "We're your answer to that, good friend, so just pitch in and give us a hand getting the grub that will freeze and the bedrolls up here to your place." Palmer, muttering to himself, did as he was told, and by the afternoon we were installed for the night. Palmer had plenty of room, as the building had originally been the mill bunkhouse. There were many rooms, but most of them were empty, as Palmer had taken 4 at one end of the building for his use and closed off the rest to cut down on the heating. Cold as it was, we were cozy enough with a big kitchen range in 2 of the rooms, with coal in the bin to fire them. Palmer sat to and cooked dinner for us, and we were all more than willing to turn in early, looking forward to the first trip up the hill in the morning. Palmer had plenty of beds made up, so we didn't use our own bedrolls. This we regretted very quickly. Once the bed warmed up, we found we were anything but alone and learned what it's like to have myriad fleas hopefully eating their way along our bodies, leaving trails of bites that reminded us for days of their presence. It was cold when we rolled out of bed and got fire started, and black as black outside. Down here in the bottom of the gulch, the sun didn't look in until almost noon at this time of year, and didn't stay long. Daylight came as we were finishing breakfast. The boss decided we would take nothing along until we had made a trip to see how the land lay, and what shape the bunkhouse might be, etc. So we set out on foot in snow too many feet deep. We only went a mile, but we climbed a full 900 feet in that mile. Finally, we got within sight of the bunkhouse. We were standing at a curve in the trail that looked backward to a nice, safe, wide trail, and forward to 1,000 yards of very steep slope over which we would have to pass to reach the bunkhouse. The slope was narrow, with a cliff over it on the left and 1,000 feet of air beneath it on the right. There was no sign of a trail in the expanse of snow-covered rock. "Here," the boss said, "we will spread out. I'll go first, and you all wait until I get 100 yards out before the next one starts, and let him get the same distance out before the next," and so on. Sam, one of us who was never much for talk, said, "Why?" "So if the snow comes loose, it won't get more than one of us." "If the snow comes loose," he had said. Sam looked at me, and I looked at Sam, and we both looked down into the chasm below the trail. It was clear what would happen if that snow comes loose. At this point, several other things cleared up too. Why, for instance, mules couldn't haul our stuff in, but we could. Mules cost money, but fools like us could be hired for $1 a day. Well, I was tired of going without a job, so when the boss got out there 100 yards, I followed him. And when I got out 100 yards, Sam followed me, and when Sam got out 100 yards, John followed him. After the first few hundred feet, the sheer effort to stay on the trail overcame the freezing fear, and by the time we got to the bunkhouse, the fear was almost forgotten. It was high there, and we were all fighting for breath and sweating even though the temperature was still way down. The boss dug the snow out from around the door of the blacksmith shop, and we went in, got a fire going in the forge, then took a look around. The building was 2 stories tall, anchored to the cliff by cables bolted to pieces of drill steel, which in turn had been cemented into holes drilled in the rock. The building once was twice as long, and we asked the boss what had happened to the missing half. "Snowslide chopped it in 2. "Any men in it?" "No, it was closed down at the time." The second floor was the living floor, with a big room for bunks, dining room, and beyond that, the kitchen. The whole place was a mess. The windows were not broken out, but water had dripped through the roof and left great spreading masses of ice on the floor. The tar paper sheathing inside on the walls looked to be completely soaked and then frozen, and we saw, after we got a good fire going in the stove in the kitchen and melting began, that this indeed was the case. The boss rubbed his hands together and said, "Right now this looks pretty hopeless, but you'll be surprised how much better it will be when we get a little work done." Nobody said a word. So back down the hill we went, loaded pack sacks with carpenter tools, nails, and each of us took a roll of roofing paper on a shoulder, and off we went. After a few days and many trips up that damn hill and across that last bit of treacherous trail, we were beginning to get the place almost livable, so we began hauling supplies up the hill. Another week of this, and we got over the sore muscles that had gone with it. Nearly every night it would snow a foot or so, and most days it snowed part of the time, so snow was steadily getting deeper, and the trip up the hill was each time more difficult. As time went on, we dwelt less and less on the chance of the snow going out over the dangerous section, but we were always subconsciously aware of the simple fact that with each foot of snow laid down on that steep slope, the danger of its sliding grew more acute. We were now hauling dynamite. We had a ton of the stuff to move, and taking the sticks out of the boxes and loading them into pack sacks was a time-consuming chore. It was Palmer who suggested that he load the extra pack sacks while we were on the trail so we wouldn't lose that time each trip. None of us gave a thought to this offer of help from Palmer, who generally was grouchy and not too inclined to help. This was a good idea, so now we had only to shed the empty pack sack, shrug into one that Palmer had loaded, and start back up the hill. Dynamite is safe enough to handle. Nowadays, 1930s, it isn't as ticklish as it once was. Time was a few years back when dynamite would freeze and become highly unstable stuff, liable to detonate for little or no reason, but not this modern stuff we were packing. The trail became more and more of a problem. Have you ever walked on a trail built up little by little from snow falling day by day? The trail turns into a narrow track of solid material with nothing but fluff on both sides. If your foot doesn't land just right on the pack trail, it slips off into the fluff, and you are suddenly waist deep or chin deep in soft snow and with a pack sack of dynamite on your back. Other times the foot slips into thin air and you land on the back of your neck, still with that dynamite, only this time it's underneath you, a cushion. It's a comforting thought that today's dynamite is really nice, safe stuff. Once across the treacherous last bit of trail, we removed the powder from the backpack and went back down the hill for another load. The third day of this went fine until I casually dumped a load of dynamite out on the floor of the blacksmith shop and started to stack it into a box. Whoa up there! What the hell? These sticks were discolored and gooey. What goes on? Nice fresh dynamite doesn't look like this. I picked up a stick and turned it to read the date printed on its side. January 6, 1918. Where did this come from? Wait, 15 years? My God, that goes back far enough to predate non-freezing powder, and if this has frozen and thawed repeatedly for 15 years, it is certainly terribly sensitive to shock. Slowly and carefully, I laid the stick down and backed away from the pile, wondering where the stuff might have come from and what to do next. The boss came in and stood there huffing and puffing with his load of more of the nasty stuff. He became aware of my tension and said, "What's the matter with you?" I pointed to the pile of dynamite sticks on the floor. He started to remove his backpack, but paused while he took in the significance of the discolored mess on the floor. Then he paled, turned around, went outside, walked to the end of the trestle from which rock was dumped into Cunningham Gulch, and there, slowly, cautiously, he shrugged the straps off to let the backpack slide from his back, down through the ties, under the rails of the trestle, and watched it lazily turn over and over as it dropped 1,000 feet to the rocks below. There was a flash of light, and an instant later the roar of the explosion floated up to us. The boss turned to me and said, "Palmer! Palmer has traded some of his old powder for some of our new." He started down the hill with the idea in mind of teaching the old man some sort of lesson, and the closer he got to Palmer's house, the madder he got until he was ready to explode long before he reached the last bit of trail. When he saw the door standing open, he deduced that Palmer had heard the noise and had abruptly taken off for parts unknown. Now that it was safely over, it began to have its funny side, even as we had pictures of ourselves being blown to bits.